Hi, welcome. My name is Michelle Lane, and I want to talk to you about something that is so important to me and something that has made such a profound impact. I want to talk about a virus that could take years off of your life. It could make you fat, it could cause you to have high blood pressure, diabetes, heart attack, or even a stroke. What if I told you that this virus messes with your brain the same way Alzheimer's does, makes you hard to think intelligently, and causes you to be angry and depressed? How would you feel if you discovered that you had a virus that made you more likely to get divorced, struggle financially, and even lose friends? And what if this virus is passed on from your family to your friends to your coworkers just through casual contact? The virus I'm talking about this time is complaining. Complaining rewires your brain for negativity, making you look for and attract problems. Complaining makes your adrenal cortex dump out stress hormones like cortisol, and that's what makes you more likely to be fat, have high blood pressure, heart attacks, or even a stroke. Complaining can shrink your hippocampus, mimicking Alzheimer's and making it hard for you to think clearly. The average person complains between 50 and 30 times a day, according to research, and we have no awareness that we're even doing it. I like to say that complaining is like bad breath. You notice it when it comes out of somebody else's mouth, but maybe not so much your own. So today what I want to talk about is what I've learned about complaining, how to identify it, some tips and tricks on how do you help reduce complaining around you, the 5 reasons people complain, and most of all, I want to teach you something that you can do to help reduce complaining in your life and hopefully help modify your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions and become a happier person. So let's dive in, right? So first I want to be clear. The kind of complaining we're talking about is not when you call customer support, like you have a problem with your computer and you share what the problem is and you ask for resolution. That's not complaining. That's great conversation and that's wonderful communication. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is this kind of how dare you or how dare this is happening to me type of experience. So becoming a complaint-free person, which I think we should all be, is not taking whatever life throws our way and kind of not, dealing with it or not speaking up when something happens. It's really about practicing good communication and speaking directly and only to the person who can resolve your problem. Most people come home from work and they complain about their work to their spouse, right? And then they go to work and then they complain about their spouse to the people that they work with. And they can't understand why nothing gets better. Because complaining to people who have nothing to do with improving the situation is negative. It serves no purpose. It's destructive to your health, your happiness, your success, and your relationships. And we're going to show how the science proves that. I love to go to 54th Street. I think their tortilla soup is amazing. And, I went recently and I had some soup, but it was cold when it first came out. So it would be complaining if when the server came over and asked, "Hey, how's your soup? Right? You guys got everything you need?" And I said, "Oh, it's fine." And I didn't say anything, but immediately when that person walked away, I tell the person that I'm with, "Oh, of course, right? Of course, my soup is cold every time I come here and become a victim to this situation, complaining to my friend about my cold soup instead of just talking directly to the person who could resolve the problem. That's not complaining if I had just told the server that my soup was cold. Hey, you might not know this. It's a great way to kind of slide into sharing information that somebody may not want to be receiving. Hey, you may not know, but the soup came out cold. Can you heat that up for me? That's not complaining. Okay. So you kind of see the difference. Complaining is this kind of energy that is, how dare this happen to me? Or people that use the word of course are typically complaining. So that's the definition of complaining that we're going to be talking about today. So complaining is completely and directly tied to our happiness. The science says so. I do a whole nother talk about the science of happiness, and there was some great work done in the University of Minnesota to determine how our set point of happiness is developed in us. 10% is from our circumstances, 50% is from your biologically determined and from your family, and then 40% comes. This is how complaining catches us 40% of our happiness is determined by our own thoughts, our own actions, and our behaviors, this lens in which we view the world, right? That's how our happiness is determined. So we can't control our biological set point of happiness, and your experiences or circumstances, adverse, childhood or whatever, can't really control that either. But that 40%, man, that's on us. That's for us to work on. And that's what I want to teach you about today. One of my favorite stories is about two construction guys. They sit down to eat lunch, right? It's a beautiful sunny day. They're sitting on the truck bed, kind of swinging their legs off the side. And first guy opens his lunch and he's like, oh, meatloaf sandwich. I hate meatloaf. Kind of begrudges a little bit. And the other guy doesn't really say anything, his buddy. And he just keeps on, eating his lunch. They only had so much time, but, the other guy eventually eats his lunch. Next day, same two friends sit down to eat their lunch. First guy opens up his lunch and he's like, oh, for heaven's sakes, man, meatloaf again. I'm so sick of meatloaf. Complains about, how much he dislikes meatloaf. The other guy, the friend, kind of looks at him and is like, all right, and continues to eat his lunch. Third day, same friends, sit down to have lunch. Opens his lunch. Oh my gosh, meatloaf again. I hate meatloaf. I detest meatloaf. And his buddy turns and looks at him. He's like, dude, why don't you ask your wife to make you something else for lunch? And his friend looks at him and he says, I make my own lunch. If you remember nothing from what I say today, let it be an understanding today that you make your own lunch by the thoughts you think, evidenced by the words you speak and the actions that you take. That creates your life and your reality. We make our own lunch. Silly story, but I promise you it's going to stick with you. So let's talk just a little bit about complaining. One of the problems with complaining is that it keeps you focused on the problem and not on the solution. Think about this. How many times do we go to a meeting because we need to solve a problem? Probably wouldn't even have meetings if we didn't have problems to solve, right? So what do? We get together, we talk about the problem, maybe talk a little bit about the solution, but then we talk about the problem. Instead, what we need to do is to talk about what it would look like for the problem to be resolved if it didn't even exist to begin with. If you start in the end with that in your focus, it's surprising how quickly the middle steps just kind of fill themselves in if you're not focused on the problem. You can also see this in venting, right? So it turns out that people that vent have an agenda. They tend to be completely focused on themselves and their own presumably horribly negative experience. And by showing their frustration or their anger or their disappointment, they're basically soliciting attention from you. They want to feel validated from you and receive attention or sympathy. Venters are particularly likely to kind of discount any suggestion you have or proposed solution to their problem. They don't want any solutions. They just want to be validated. A downside of venting, of course, is that it can dampen people's moods. There was a series of studies that was done, and the researchers tracked people's mood before and after hearing a complaint. And as you probably predicted, listening to gripes made people feel worse. And actually, the people that did the complaining felt worse than the people who received the complaining. So one of the problems with complaining is it focuses on the problem and not on the solution. Doesn't do anything. So complaining is also damaging to our health. In a book written by Will Bowen, A Complaint-Free World, he tells a story about a man that suffered from chronic migraines, okay, his whole adult life. And every night he would come home from work and he would, greet his wife and, she wouldn't even say, how's your day? He would basically just kind of give this headache report of, oh, my head hurt, like a 6 today. And, they didn't really even talk about anything. And he realized that he always had to have a headache in order for him and his wife to be discussing anything. So he made the decision of, I'm just going to quit talking or complaining about my headaches. He hasn't had a headache in 7 years. He is now the CEO of Will Bowen's Complaint-Free World. Our minds and our bodies are connected. What we say, our bodies are going to hear. And when we complain about our health, our bodies are going to make sure that we have something to complain about. You see this with people who are ready to die, right? They'll complain about their health. People say, I'm going to die, or I feel like I'm going to die. And sure enough, that rings true more often than it should. Your mind and your body are connected. So complaining, it keeps you focused on the problem, and it's also really damaging to our health. It's also extremely damaging to our relationships. However you describe somebody, that person is going to be that way for you. So what we do is we wait for things to happen to support the story that we're saying about that person, right? And we continue to add this negative energy and perpetuate the problem. Like the best way to see is like I have this group of friends and we get together usually every week, and we call ourselves kind of like this group therapy. And we go to a Mexican restaurant and we complain about our partners, drink margaritas, eat cheese dip. And that tends to be kind of this common theme of like how annoying or what crazy silly thing our partners have done in their lives. And if you spend 2 hours complaining about the person you love in your life, it's not surprising you come home thinking that all of your partners are dogs and you've got old Yeller sitting in the seat in the living room, right? Because you have invested in this negative concept and you're looking for negative things that support your story. One of the things I could, share is that when I would go out for margaritas with my friends, I would come home and I would be so annoyed that, John's socks were on the floor and that spoon that he takes a couple bites of ice cream with every night is in the sink. And why can he not put it in the dishwasher? And I would just, I perpetuated the problem and the negativity in our relationship by looking for things that supported my thought of like, he's a jerk, right? Instead of focusing on the fact that, man, every Thursday he hung with the kids so I could go hang out with my friends. Never questioned it, supported it. That's my bad. That's my bad. So complaining, I'll tell you what, focuses on the problem. It's damaging to our health, it's damaging to relationships, and it also limits career success. Jobs, the descriptions in HR don't say must complain frequently, right? I've often thought as a leader that you can't teach people anything necessarily that's related to an attitude. They either have it or they don't. I had this experience as a nurse in a local hospital that taught me this lesson really early. I worked with many really skilled, smart, talented nurses, but this unit's culture was absolutely toxic. They would do the care provided out on the unit, and then they would come in the break room and immediately start complaining about the patient, the family, the doctors, their coworkers. It was so toxic that patient satisfaction was low, morale was awful, outcomes for the patients were worse. And our leader decided there had to be a change. And he read Will Bowen's book, A Complaint-Free World, and he developed a complaint-free unit. And he wrote a policy about it. He made people accountable to it. And he refused to allow weeds to grow in his garden. It was absolutely the best leadership lesson that I could have ever learned. Negativity is so contagious. You have to stop the spread. You have to be the person that did it. So now when I hire nurses or other team members, I don't necessarily focus on their skills or their knowledge about whatever I'm hiring them for. I focus on soft skills. Can they show empathy? Are they able to connect with people? Can they think under pressure? How do they make decisions? What's their emotion related to that? How are their communication and attitude skills overall? Those are the things I look for when I'm hiring. So complaining can be limiting in your career success. So if complaining is so bad for you, you're probably wondering why people do it. Dr. Robin Kowinski out of Clemson University, he decided through all the research that he did related to complaining that people complain for one of 5 reasons. Will Bowen came up with this acronym, GRIPE, to help you remember the 5 reasons that people complain and how you can get them to stop. But before I go further, I've got to warn you, simply by hearing me speak today, you are going to notice complaining more than ever before. If you're like me and you've been in healthcare for a while, you remember when people didn't smoke, right? I remember, you remember when people did smoke everywhere. So I remember seeing pictures from North Kansas City Hospital 50 years ago, and everybody smoked. There was a cute picture of a doctor and a nurse on kind of in the nurse's station, leaning on the counter with their caps, smoking a cigarette, and a patient standing right there, probably there because they were short of air. Everybody was smoking. But now when you see people smoke, it's so unique and so different. You're like, oh gosh, they're smoking. That is going to be complaining for you. You are all of a sudden going to notice the funk that is around you. The good news is you're going to be able to categorize the complaints that you see, kind of understand a little bit about maybe why people are complaining around you, help to meet their needs, and maybe they'll stop doing it. So first reason that people complain, GRIPE is the acronym to remember, is to get attention. This is the most common reason that people complain. They simply want to talk to you. We want to connect with other people, but most of the time we have absolutely no idea how to do it. Human beings are social creatures. This is, why when you get in an elevator that people feel uncomfortable, right? Because you're not being acknowledged. So you get in there and you're both kind of standing there and nobody is able to say anything. And you break the tension by complaining. You complain about the weather. You complain about a sports team. You complain about politics. You complain about your kids. You complain about your health or anything you can think of, basically to kind of break the tension. And you can feel that people are more relaxed because you've acknowledged each other. Hey, notice me should be like tattooed on people's foreheads, right? Everybody wants to be noticed and have people pay attention to them. So when somebody says to you, oh man, the weather's so crappy today, what they're really saying is see me. I want to get your attention. I want to connect with you. So what do you do when people come and they complain to you in your office? My kids, blah, 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 right? I use this magic phrase and I'm going to teach you my secret. I just say, well, what's going well, right? So anytime somebody comes and complains to me, I just say, oh, wow, that's horrible. But what's going well? And the thing is if you keep doing this, one of two things is going to happen. Either they will become annoyed with you for saying what's going well every time they come to complain to you and they'll walk away frustrated, or maybe they'll switch and they'll quit complaining. Either way, you win. People complain because they want attention. All right. First reason, notice it. It'll show up. What's going well is how you solve that. Second reason that people complain around you is to remove responsibility. If you think about this, you give somebody a task and they don't want to do it, right? So they complain about the circumstances surrounding it, right? I need to get this report and I complain about it. I'd love to get you that report, but I need to get it from marketing and you know how slow they are. It takes forever, that chain of command, and you can't get Sharon from accounting. And, basically by complaining, this person has removed themselves from responsibility for getting that report. They're saying, we can't do that, So have you ever had somebody come and complain to you? And since, you're nice, you try to say to them, hey, have you thought about this? Or what about that? That's not going to help with these people. People that come to you complaining to remove responsibility, they don't want suggestions. They're not looking for a solution. What they're looking for you is for you to be on their side. They want to remove themselves from a responsibility. So here's the question you ask them. If it were possible, how would you do it, right? So people get sidetracked and they're like, oh, that wouldn't work, blah, blah, blah. And you just say to them again, yeah, I get that. I hear you. But if you could do it, what would that look like? Same concept. People are going to do one of two things. They're going to understand that you're completely focused on the solution and you don't want to hear their excuses and their complaints about why they can't get this done. And they will respond that way, or they're not going to come to you complaining about the reasons they can't get their role done, complaining about other people. So you win. If it were possible, how would you do it? Third reason that people complain is to inspire envy. It's also kind of known as like the humble brag, because in our culture it's considered rude to brag about your good fortune, but you can complain about your good fortune at the same time accomplish the same outcome, right? You can complain that your new iPhone has all of these gadgets and you don't know how to use it, and then your friends know that you have a new iPhone, right? You get it. I see this a lot, right? So when you complain about a person too, right? This is also considered kind of a bragging, because what you're doing is you're bragging that you don't have that character flaw, right? So that's why gossiping is also considered complaining. So if someone is complaining to you to brag, you compliment the opposite. It's easier to kind of understand this through like a scenario. So somebody comes to you and they're like, man, did you see the way she's freaking dressed? Oh my gosh. How you respond to that is you say, oh, man, you know something I love about you? You dress so cool. Where do you shop? Right? You just roll over it and you compliment the opposite of what they're complaining about. Karen, she's always freaking late to work. You know what I love about you? You are so punctual. Like, what do? You like a robot. You're here on time every day, right? They're fishing for a compliment anyway. You might as well just give it to them up front. They're bragging to make themselves feel superior and others inferior. That's why they're complaining about them. You might as well cut to the chase and compliment them and get it over with. So, inspiring envy. People complain to inspire envy or brag. What do? Compliment the opposite. Fourth reason people complain, for power. Man, you can notice this. We complain in this country about every 4 years, and I am not talking about the Olympics. You also see this type of complaint a lot in families, power, right? So Uncle Brent constantly complains about Cousin Marcy. Why are they doing this? It's because in case it comes down to a situation between Uncle Brent and Marcy, Uncle Brent wants me to be on his side, right? People do this at work as a way of kind of building a case against someone else in case they want that position or another person. People complaining really believe what they're saying. So just acknowledge it, but don't get caught up in it. If somebody is complaining for power, do not get involved. One of the things I've seen, one of the best parenting tricks I've ever seen, is that if somebody comes and they're complaining about this other person to you, right? You just say, man, sounds like you guys have a lot to talk about. If you want, I'll sit in while you guys talk, right? My mom used to do that. I love all of you equally, right? When me and my siblings used to argue and fight, I love all of you equally. Sounds like you guys have got a lot to talk about. If you want, I'll sit in and help you guys talk about it, right? Don't get involved when people are complaining about each other for power. Power in a family, power in the work, power in whatever you do in the social aspect. You'll notice it. Be Switzerland. Don't get involved. Just push them back to each other, the person they're complaining about. Sounds like you guys got a lot to talk about. Fifth reason people complain, right? So remove responsibility is like someone is trying to say, this is why I shouldn't even try. The cards are like stacked against me, right? Marketing doesn't give me the report, Sharon's such a problem, blah, blah, blah. This reason of complaining is to excuse poor performance. It's after they've performed, but they did it poorly. So they start to rationalize, right? They tell themselves rational lies as to why they didn't succeed. Golfers are really good at this. I'm a golfer. So I hit a drive, I slice it off to the right? Well, immediately in my head, I'm thinking somebody sneezed. My hands are sweaty. My gloves are not fitting right? I am telling myself rational lies. I am complaining in the sense, right? So When someone complains to excuse their poor performance, what do? You say, how do you plan to do this better next time, right? The worst thing you can do is to do some sort of post-mortem about everything you think is happening, or, all they're going to do is tell you all the reasons it's not their fault. Don't waste your time. So 5 reasons people complain: get attention, remove responsibility, inspire envy, for power, and to excuse their poor performance. I could be wrong, but I think that almost all complaining falls into one of these categories. And, don't get me wrong too, like some people are ninjas at complaining. You can actually do 2 of them at the same time. You could be somebody that's complaining to excuse your poor performance and still trying to get attention, right? So I'd like to say that like complaining is kind of like a competitive sport too. So it always goes from lesser to greater. So I was running in the woods, I stumbled, I actually broke this finger right here. And I'm telling that story, complaining about it, probably because I want attention or whatever. And then that person tells me a story about, oh yeah, I went skiing and I tore 3 ligaments and blah, blah, blah. Could you imagine if the next person said, oh yeah, I got a hangnail yesterday? Like it doesn't work that way. It always, complaints grow, right? You have to like nip it in the bud, right? Because complaining is a competitive sport. We're always trying to top each other's complaints. So nip it in the bud quickly. Complaining is dangerous. All right. So I've shared some tips about how to stop complaining, but now I want to talk about the most important person, right? You can only influence yourself, really, ultimately. So the best way the science says to start to be a complaint-free person is you have to tie your mind and your body together. So you have to do something that creates an awareness for yourself. So on how often that you're complaining. So how I did it is I started wearing a bracelet, this little bracelet right here. It's a John Muir bracelet. I love John Muir. If you don't know who he is, you should Google it after this talk. He is basically the founder of the National Park System in the United States. But this bracelet is so important to me. Every time I complained, I'd move the bracelet from one side to the other. So I'm tying my thoughts of complaining to an action, right? So ultimately, I become more aware of my complaining. I'm engaging my body and my brain together. So keep switching every day. You start over, right? And you're going to try to go 21 days without complaining, because that's how you can break a habit according to the science. So day one, you find yourself constantly complaining, but then you get to the point where you start to notice and things start to change. There's a process that happens when we're creating change in our life. It's kind of like this competency stages, right? So the first stage of competency is this unconscious incompetence. Then you're kind of conscious that you're not doing it well. And then there's conscious competence, right? And then there's this unconscious competence. So let's take the example of complaining. I think that's probably the easiest way. So most people have no awareness that they complain. They don't even realize it, no idea. And so they go and maybe they hear this kind of 30-minute talk about complaining. And then all of a sudden they realize like, oh, wow, how incompetent they are. They realize that maybe, gosh, I do complain about people and I am trying to just get attention and I say something negative and it's not necessary to start a conversation with something negative, right? And they're kind of struggling. So it's this kind of moving from unconsciousness, not knowing that I complain, to this conscious competence, like, oh, wow, I do complain. It's an awareness, right? So then you start to move to that conscious, I'm aware that I complain, to a competence. So you start to stop yourself. You're like, oh, you start to say, oh, wow, did you hear what she said? And you go, oh, I'm not complaining. And you shut your mouth. That's the stage of conscious competence. That's kind of where I live. I catch myself, sometimes I don't, but I try, right? Unconscious competence is when you just don't. I mean, you have it so hardwired that you are not a complainer. I think that this is one of the key things that we can do. And we can talk about it openly, right? To other people. We can share like, hey, I recognize how negative I am and how I'm complaining and how really I'm either making excuses for things I'm not performing well at, or I'm just trying to get attention, or maybe I'm bragging. All of those things come into play ourselves. We're the ones that are aware, because remember, our happiness is 40% tied to our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own emotions, and the view, our lens in which we look at the world. So I tell you, this has really been hard to adopt, but it shifts everything around you and it shifts everything inside of you when you're not looking for things to complain about and you're making yourself more aware of what's going on in your head. So hopefully this has been an awareness conversation for you. You've learned a little bit about complaining, why people complain, some tricks to maybe stop people from complaining around you, and ultimately some guidelines to how you can stop complaining in your own life and be happier and healthier. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you, and you guys take care.